The air in the Knoxville conference hall crackled with restless energy. A swarm of reporters and onlookers packed shoulder to shoulder on a brisk February afternoon. Cameras hummed, their lenses trained on the podium where Karoline Leavitt stood, all 27 years of her radiating a quiet fire. She'd just wrapped a speech. Bold words about liberty, unity, and the right to speak your truth in a nation split down the middle, when a voice cut through the din like a whip cracking in a storm. Take it off. Before we get into the details, let me know in the comments where you are watching this video from. The words came sharp and unyielding from Marcus Tate, a veteran broadcaster with a reputation for tearing down anyone who dared to stand tall. His gravelly tone wasn't a question. It was an order, laced with disdain and loud enough to freeze the room. Heads snapped toward him, then to Karoline, the target of his outburst. Every eye zeroed in on the small silver cross dangling from her neck, its soft gleam catching the overhead lights. It wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, but to Tate, it might as well have been a blazing neon sign. Karoline stood still, her breath hitching for just a moment as the silence swallowed the crowd. Tate leaned forward in his seat, his graying temples slick with the sheen of a man who thrived on chaos. He wasn't some small-time pundit. He was a media heavyweight, a 50-something kingpin who'd spent decades shaping narratives and crushing dissent. Now, in this packed room in eastern Tennessee, he'd turned a routine press event into something raw, something personal. Take it off, he snarled again, dragging the words out like a taunt, his lips curling into a smirk. You don't get to flaunt that here. The audience shifted, a ripple of unease spreading through the rows. Pens scratched against notebooks, capturing the brewing storm. A few spectators glanced at each other, some intrigued, some rattled, all hooked on the drama unfolding. This wasn't about a necklace. Not in the way Tate wanted it to seem. That cross, modest and unpretentious, was Karoline's lifeline, a symbol of the faith she'd carried since she was old enough to understand it. At 27, she'd already faced down doubters and cynics, from schoolyard debates to packed lecture halls, and she wasn't about to shrink now. Not here, not under Tate's glare. But Marcus Tate smelled blood. He leaned closer, his voice booming over the murmurs. What's wrong, Karoline? Too attached to your little trinket? Or too afraid to drop the act? The jab landed hard, and a low hum pulsed through the crowd. Phones rose, their screens glowing as they recorded every second, waiting for her to buckle or bite back. Tate's eyes gleamed with the confidence of a man who'd toppled bigger names than hers. He'd clashed with Karoline before, their past encounters crackling with tension on his late-night show, where her steady resolve had once left him grasping for a comeback. That loss still stung, and today, he wasn't playing politics. He was striking at her core, aiming to peel away her beliefs in front of a live audience. The cross hung steady against her chest, a quiet defiance in its stillness. Around her, the room held its breath, the tension coiling tighter with every tick of the clock. A reporter near the back coughed, breaking the spell for a fleeting second. Another adjusted his camera, zooming in on Karoline's face. Would she waver? Would she lash out? The moment felt bigger than it should have, a Thursday showdown in Knoxville spiraling into something electric. Tate had a gift for that, turning sparks into wildfires. But as the silence stretched, something shifted. Karoline tilted her head just a fraction, a whisper of a smile brushing her lips. Not forced, not shaken, but calm, almost daring. It threw Tate off, a flicker of doubt crossing his weathered face. What would she do? The question buzzed unspoken through the crowd. Why did that tiny cross ignite such fury in a man who'd faced down presidents and power brokers? And how would Karoline Leavitt, at 27, with the weight of 1,000 eyes on her, turn this ambush into something no one saw coming? The answer was seconds away, and it promised to rewrite the script. Hang on tight. The hum of the Knoxville press room still vibrated from Marcus Tate's biting demand, but all eyes clung to Karoline Leavitt. That subtle smile, calm, unbreakable, left the crowd grasping for answers. Who was this woman, poised like a beacon amid the chaos? She wasn't a name splashed across headlines, not yet, but the steel in her gaze told a story that demanded to be unraveled. Karoline's roots didn't lie in glitzy cities or privileged circles. No, they stretched back to a weathered farmhouse in rural South Carolina, a place where faith wasn't just preached, it was lived. Imagine it. A creaking porch, a roof patched too many times, and a family scraping by on grit and grace. Her mom, Ruth, was a school teacher, her voice gentle but her spine ironclad. Her dad, Henry, worked the land, his calloused hands planting more than crops, he planted lessons. Around a scarred oak table, they'd sit each evening, heads bowed, voices soft, giving thanks for the day, no matter how lean. Faith doesn't shout, Ruth often said, her words wrapping Karoline like a worn shawl. It stands. It carries you when nothing else does. Karoline absorbed that truth early, carrying it like a compass. In high school, she was the one who'd challenge a teacher's take on justice, not for applause, but because she believed it mattered. College flung her into a bustling campus 2 counties over, where she faced rooms full of doubters, people who smirked at her principles. She didn't flinch. Alone in those debates, she honed a voice that cut through cynicism, not with volume, but with clarity. It made her a target, sure, but it also made her a lighthouse for those who felt drowned out by the noise. At 27, she'd climbed from those small-town roots to stages across the region, her words ringing out like a call to arms, or a call to listen. Just hours before Tate's ambush, she'd stood at that Knoxville podium, speaking on unity in a nation pulling apart at the seams. Freedom's not just for the bold, she'd said, her tone steady, it's for everyone who dares to breathe it. The crowd, some nodding, some skeptical, leaned closer, drawn by her rare blend of fire and calm. But Tate wasn't there to hear her out. He was there to tear her down. Ruth's old warning echoed in her mind. Stand tall, and they'll push harder. Henry's gruff addition followed. But they can't uproot you, girl. Not if you know your ground. That ground held firm now as Tate's glare bore into her. Karoline wasn't some slick politician or a media puppet. She was a fighter, forged in whispered prayers and stubborn resolve. That silver cross around her neck? No mere trinket. It was a thread to those nights at the table, to the girl who'd learned courage didn't need a crowd, it just needed conviction. The room watched, pulses racing, as her story lingered unspoken between them. Who was Karoline Leavitt beneath the spotlight? A dreamer with a backbone? A voice too real to silence? Maybe both. One thing was certain, she wasn't here to shrink or bow. Tate thought he'd pinned her, thought that cross was a chink in her armor. He couldn't have been more wrong. What she'd say next would flip the showdown upside down, and it's coming fast. Got a hunch how she'll turn the tables on Tate? Toss your guess in the comments. We're betting you'll want to talk about this one. The Knoxville press room still thrummed with the echo of Marcus Tate's sharp demand, but the spotlight stayed glued to Karoline Leavitt. That quiet smile, steady, unyielding, kept the crowd guessing, their curiosity buzzing like static. Who was this woman, standing tall against a media giant's venom? She wasn't a face plastered on billboards, not yet, but the resolve in her hazel eyes whispered a story too gripping to ignore. Karoline's beginnings weren't paved with privilege or flash. They traced back to a modest home in New Hampshire, where faith wasn't just a Sunday ritual, it was the heartbeat of her world. Picture a small house, walls steeped in the sin of pine and perseverance, where Karoline grew up at 27 as the daughter of a tight-knit family. Her mom, whose name will keep true to her roots, was a steady hand, raising Karoline with lessons of strength over noise. Her dad, likewise unnamed here but real in her life, poured grit into her bones, showing her how to stand firm when the ground shook. Around their kitchen table, chipped but warm, they'd pray each night, soft words of gratitude, even when the pantry ran thin. Faith isn't loud, her mother would say, voiced like a hearth fire. It's deep. It holds you when the rest falls away. Karoline carried the depth from her earliest days. In high school, she was the girl who'd debate a point in civics class, not to show off, but because truth mattered to her. College at the University of New Hampshire sharpened her edge, thrusting her into rooms where her beliefs stood alone. She didn't shout or shrink. She spoke, clear and unshaken, earning stares and sometimes scorn. That path, from quiet New England streets to public stages, taught her a hard truth. Standing up often meant standing apart. But it also lit a spark, turning her into a voice for those who felt erased by the roar of the crowd. Now, she was no stranger to heat. She'd risen from those roots to speak across the Northeast, her words slicing through division like a blade through fog. Hours before Tate's attack, she'd held that Knoxville podium, rallying for unity in a splintered land. Freedom isn't just for the brash, she'd said, her tone a calm thunder, it's for every soul who dares to claim it. The audience, some allies, some skeptics, leaned in, caught by her rare mix of grace and grit. But Tate? He didn't come to hear her. He came to break her. Her mother's old words rang in her ears, stand for something, and they'll test you. Her father's nod followed. But you've got roots, kid. They can't rip those out. Those roots anchored her now as Tate's stare drilled into her. Karoline wasn't some polished figurehead or a fleeting star. She was a fighter, shaped by whispered hopes and unwavering will. That silver cross at her throat? No decoration. It was a lifeline to those New Hampshire nights, to the girl who'd learned courage didn't need fanfare, it just needed a pulse. The room watched, hearts pounding, as her story hovered between them, untold but electric. Who was Karoline Leavitt beyond the glare? A dreamer with steel? A spark too bright to dim? Maybe both. One thing was sure, she wasn't here to cower or fade. Tate thought he trapped her, thought that cross was a flaw he could twist. He was dead wrong. What she'd say next would flip this clash on its head, and it's barreling toward us. Got a wild guess how she'll turn Tate's game around? Drop it in the comments. We're itching to see what you think she's got up her sleeve. The Knoxville press room hung in a brittle hush, Marcus Tate's taunt. Take it off. Still ringing like a gunshot. The crowd's eyes bore into Karoline Leavitt, waiting for her to crack under the weight of his sneer. That silver cross glinted at her throat, a silent lightning rod in the storm. Tate leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk daring her to falter. But Karoline didn't flinch. She stood there, all 27 years of her framed against the chaos, and tilted her head just enough to catch the light. Then, with a whisper of a smile, soft, steady, almost defiant, she spoke. You want me to take it off? Her voice was calm, a still pond amid ripples of tension. The room leaned in, pins poised, cameras whirring. She let the question linger, her gaze locking onto Tate's with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. This cross, she continued, her fingers brushing the silver gently, it's not just jewelry. It's my faith. It's my connection to something bigger, my strength, my compass. And you're asking me to remove it because... What? It bothers you. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They cut deeper than Tate's barbs, flipping the script in a heartbeat. Gasps flickered through the crowd, some soft, some sharp, as her meaning sank in. This wasn't about a necklace anymore. It was about him. Tate's smirk faltered, a crack in his armor, but Karoline didn't pounce. She didn't have to. Her tone stayed measured, warm even, like she was inviting him to a table instead of a fight. I'm curious, Marcus, she said, her voice lifting just enough to carry. Why does it get under your skin? Is it the cross itself, or what it stands for? A murmur swept the room, heads turning as if they felt the shift too. Tate blinked, caught off guard by the question's edge. He'd come to dismantle her, to paint her as some rigid relic in a modern world. But here she was, turning his weapon back on him, not with anger, not with venom, but with a quiet power that filled the space. She took a breath, her eyes sweeping the crowd now, pulling them into her orbit. This isn't about me hiding, she said. It's about me living. This cross, it's been with me through nights I didn't think I'd get through. It's a piece of who I am, forged in a little New Hampshire town where I learned faith isn't a prop. It's a promise. Her roots flashed through her words, those evenings with her mom and dad, praying over a modest meal, their voices weaving a safety net she'd carried ever since. She didn't name them, didn't need to. Their lessons lived in her stance. Tate opened his mouth, maybe to interrupt, but no sound came. The room was hers now. You think I'd shed it because you say so? She asked, her smile widening just a touch, not mocking, but knowing. Faith isn't a coat I toss off when the room gets hot. It's my spine. It's what brought me here, from college debates at UNH to this podium, talking about a freedom you claim to defend. The air thickened, electric with her clarity. Reporters scribbled faster, their pages a blur. A few in the back nodded, caught by the turn she'd taken. Tate's jaw tightened. He'd walked in ready to bury her, but she'd sidestepped his trap and laid one of her own. So tell me, she pressed, her voice still steady, what's really at stake here? A piece of silver? Or the idea that I won't bend to make you comfortable? The question hung, a challenge wrapped in grace, and the silence that followed was deafening. This was Karoline Leavitt unmasked, not the caricature Tate wanted, but the woman who'd faced down bigger shadows than him. She'd turned his attack into a mirror, and the reflection wasn't pretty. What would he do now? Scramble for a comeback? Double down? The crowd didn't know, but they couldn't look away. Her next words would seal this moment, and they're coming fast. Think she's got Tate cornered? Guess how he'll squirm out, or if he even can. Drop your take in the comments. We're on the edge of our seats. The Knoxville press room lay draped in a fragile quiet. Marcus Tate's harsh, take it off, now a distant sting beneath Karoline Leavitt's unwavering presence. She'd flipped his taunt into a question that lingered like smoke, and the crowd felt the ground shift beneath them. That silver cross rested at her throat, a steadfast witness, as she pressed forward into the silence. Her voice rose again, smooth as a river over stone, carrying a weight that held every breath captive. "This isn't about pushing anything on anyone," she said, her tone gentle yet resolute. "It's about freedom." She let the word hang, her fingers tracing the cross's edge as if it grounded her in the storm. "Faith isn't a club," she went on, her gaze sweeping across the faces, some taut, some spellbound. "It's not me dictating your beliefs. God gave us all a choice, a gift I cherish. I wear this to live that, not to challenge it." A faint stir moved through the room, whispers of awe as her meaning took root. Tate shifted, his once sharp smirk dissolving into a thin line of discomfort. He'd come for a brawl, she'd brought a reckoning. Karoline's voice softened, threading vulnerability into her steel. "This cross, it's my lifeline. Growing up in New Hampshire, there were days I didn't know how to stand. My mom and dad showed me prayer, not for fixes, but for stillness. That's what carried me through dark hours, through grief, through times I felt invisible." Her words conjured a scene. A girl in a quiet town, hands clasped in the dim, faith stitching her together when the world unraveled. "It's not about being above anyone," she said. "It's about remembering, to care, to hear, to value every soul in this room, no matter where you stand." The crowd thawed, some leaning forward, others still as stone, caught in the honesty of her confession. Tate's fingers tightened on his chair. He'd aimed to shame her, but she was unveiling a strength he couldn't dent. "There are fights you don't see," she continued, her voice firm as granite. "College at UNH, facing rooms that mocked what I held dear. Moments I nearly broke, but didn't. This cross ties me to that resilience, not just mine, but something greater. It's why I'm here, pushing for a freedom that covers you too, Marcus, even when you'd silence me." A soft laugh slipped from her, not cutting, but wise, and it rippled through the tension like a breeze. The room breathed again, a few faces cracking into reluctant grins. Tate's jaw clenched. He wasn't used to losing the reins. "You told me to take it off," she said, her eyes pinning him once more, "like it's a mask I can shed. But this isn't a gimmick. It's me. It drives why I speak. For people, for principles, for a world where we don't have to match to matter." Her words settled, rich with grace, and the stillness that followed pressed against the walls. She edged closer to the podium, her shadow stretching across the floor. "I wear this to grow," she said, her voice lifting slightly, clear as a bell. "To be better than I was, kinder than I feel, open to those who need it most. If that unsettles you, Marcus, maybe it's not my cross in the way. Maybe it's something only you can wrestle with." The rebuke landed, soft as snow, hard as truth, and Tate blinked, his mouth parting then closing, stranded in her wake. This was Karoline Leavitt laid bare, not a zealot, not a target, but a woman who'd turned an insult into a testament. The room drank it in. Pens paused, lenses sharpened, pulses quickened. Tate was pinned, not by fury, but by a clarity he couldn't dodge. His next move hung in the balance, but she wasn't finished. Her final stroke was near, and it promised to etch this moment into memory. The air crackled with what was still to come. Below is Part 5, Triumph and Resolution, expanded to approximately 5,500 characters, including spaces and punctuation, written in English for an American audience and optimized for AI narration. Karoline Leavitt's real biography, age 27, New Hampshire roots, University of New Hampshire education, and unnamed parents are preserved, while other names, places, and specifics are altered. The style remains dramatic, emotional, and cinematic, with hooks to maintain 70 to 80% retention. A call to action for comments is included to boost engagement, as requested. Part 5, Triumph and Resolution. The Knoxville press room teetered on the edge of something seismic. Marcus Tate's once bold, "Take it off," now a hollow echo swallowed by Karoline Leavitt's quiet fire. She stood at the podium, that silver cross gleaming like a star against her chest, her words from moments ago, "Maybe it's something only you can wrestle with," still ringing in the air. The crowd hung on, caught in the gravity of her grace. Tate, his face a mask of strained silence, gripped the arms of his chair, outmatched by a strength he hadn't seen coming. But Karoline wasn't here to gloat. She had one last move. She leaned forward, her voice rising with a clarity that filled every corner. Unity isn't about sameness, she said, her tone steady as bedrock. It's about honoring what makes us different. This cross, it's my faith, my story, carved in a New Hampshire home where my mom and dad taught me to hold fast. But what binds us isn't symbols, it's how we choose to see each other. Her eye swept the room, resting briefly on Tate, then beyond, to the faces watching in awe. It's in listening when we'd rather shout, building when we'd rather break. That's the freedom I'm here for. The words landed like a hymn, simple yet profound, and the room erupted. Applause thundered, rolling from the back rows to the front, a wave of sound that shook the walls. Reporters clapped, their notebooks forgotten. Onlookers rose, some wiping eyes, others nodding as if waking from a trance. Tate sat still, his hands unclenching, his gaze dropping to the floor. He'd stormed in to crush her, to frame her as a relic, but she'd turned his stage into hers, not with venom, but with a truth too solid to shake. The cross stayed where it was, a quiet testament to her refusal to shrink. Karoline stepped back, her breath steady, her faint smile returning, not triumphant, but peaceful. She'd faced this fire before: college debates at UNH, rooms where her beliefs were mocked, nights when doubt clawed at her in that small New Hampshire town. Her parents' voices echoed, "Stand firm, not loud. Live it. Don't just say it." At 27, she'd carried that into Knoxville, turning a cheap shot into a moment that hummed with something bigger. The applause swelled, cameras flashed, but her calm held, a lighthouse in the roar. Tate finally moved, a slow nod breaking his stillness, less a surrender, more a reckoning. He'd underestimated her, and the room knew it. His plan to humiliate her had crumbled, leaving him the one exposed. Karoline's gaze met his for a flicker, offering not scorn, but something softer, grace, maybe, for a man who'd stepped into his own trap. The clapping faded, but the energy lingered, thick with a shared realization this wasn't just her win. It was a stand for anyone who'd ever felt silenced, shamed, or small. She closed with a breath, her voice low but piercing. "I won't hide who I am," she said, fingers brushing the cross one last time. "And I'd never ask you to." That's where we start, right there. The room stilled, her final note a thread tying them all together. Then, as if on cue, the applause surged again, louder, fiercer, a chorus of respect that drowned out the last echoes of Tate's sneer. He rose, shoulders stiff, and slipped toward the exit, the fight gone from his stride. This was Karoline Leavitt's moment, not of conquest, but of courage rooted deeper than any symbol. That cross stayed, a quiet crown on a woman who'd shown the world what strength looks like, not in tearing down, but in standing up. The crowd dispersed, buzzing with her words, her poise, her victory. What's next for her? For Tate? This story's far from over. Think she's changed the game for good? Drop your take in the comments. We want to hear how this hit you.